the world will give you an identity. It'll chew you up and spit you out. You're chasing material things. You're chasing the wealth. You're chasing the better looking wife. Whatever that is, none of those things will ever satisfy you.
Welcome to the Sober Friends podcast. My name is Matt J. And if you've ever wondered whether life can really get better without alcohol, you're in the right place. Whether you're new to recovery, have some time sober, or you're supporting somebody you love, I'm glad you're here. This is a podcast about sobriety, emotional growth, and learning how to navigate life without having to drink over it. And before we get to our guest, Mike Curry, I want to kick this off by sharing a little bit about myself because it kind of ties into what we're going to talk about today. My father was an alcoholic. His drinking caused violence and chaos in my family. I knew I never wanted to be like that. So for years, that became my bar. I had a job. I had a family. I wasn't violent. I wasn't doing the awful things that I'd seen him do growing up. But I measured that one wrong. The real evidence was much quieter. Once I started drinking, it was very difficult to stop. Or if I wanted to enjoy it, couldn't control it. If I wanted to control it, couldn't enjoy it. And I think there's a lot of people who have a version of that. They compare themselves to the worst drinker they know. And as long as they clear that bar, they tell themselves they're okay. So that's why I wanted to have Mike Curry on. Mike is sober. He hosts Sobriety, Spirituality, and Sales, and he coaches high-performing men who may be winning professionally while struggling privately. Mike, welcome to the Sober Friends podcast.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Thank you for your time this morning. I know we had to reschedule for some audio issues, so I appreciate your patience and thrilled to be here.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to have you. Happy to work around, technology. It's what we live with nowadays.
Yes.
When you hear that idea that success can become evidence people use to avoid honesty, what do you see in the men that you work with?
Yeah, great question. I have some clients who are on paper super successful. They've got, they've checked all the boxes, so to speak. Yet there's one kind of small area or large area of their life that they can't control. And that's alcohol, could be other substances. Lately, pornography has been a big topic. Marijuana, with the strains nowadays, marijuana is not what it used to be 20 years ago. But focusing on alcohol, it's like, hey, it's legal. It's on every corner. You can pop down. I've got a Circle K, 7-Eleven, 5-minute walk from my house. So those decisions can be a little easier. And so, at any rate, I think that years and maybe even decades, in just going back on my personal experience and seeing others around me, it's like, if you're used to this routine of drinking 4 to 6 beers a night, and you've done that for years or done that for decades, there's the term functioning alcoholic. I don't know how functional you are. Thriving sober is something I prefer than functioning alcoholic. But there's a quiet cost to it. I don't think that people realize how sneaky it can be and how, it can affect your mornings, definitely your afternoons, because then you're scrambling to make up for the morning at work that you missed. It affects your relationships with your children, with your spouse, the relationship to yourself. And that was my experience, is the more I used and drank, the further I got away from my true self. And, part of my sobriety journey has been coming back home, coming back to really, really discover and rediscover who I am, who I have always been. And I like to say, my identity is I'm a loving child of God. And, for me, that works really well because of the relationship that I have with a God of my understanding today. And it wasn't always that way. It's been a long road. It's been a long journey. Wouldn't trade it for the world. But, really grateful to be on this side of it and to have the focus, the clarity, to have, to be intentional on a daily basis to know where I'm going for the most part. As an entrepreneur, you kind of never really know. It's kind of a path of winding and dipping and all this stuff. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I feel fulfilled. I feel like I do have a purpose driven life at this point. And, I wake up every day and I'm excited.
Let's talk a little bona fides, I guess, not to make it a drunk-a-log, because those are my least favorite meetings that I go to. Give me a little bit of what the story looked like before and that pivot point. And you also talked about your experience with a higher power. How did that develop?
Yeah, well, first of all, I grew up Catholic.
Me too.
Okay,
Plenty
so
of guilt.
We've got some commonality there, right? I was an altar boy. We went to Catholic school. We went to church on Sundays. The sitting, the standing, the kneeling, and it's like I'm looking around like I don't understand any of this. Didn't really care to understand it. Part of my shortcoming, I think, was as a child, your brain's not fully developed into your mid-20s or whatever they say. But I'm judging these adults because they're not fitting the bill of what a Christian or a Catholic should be. So, but that's my shortcoming, right? Because I've said this before. It's like, hey, sick people belong in hospitals just as much as they belong in churches, right? So. Yes. There was one perfect person that walked the earth. He's no longer around. I don't know what the story I had made up in my head or what was going on. But also, I had nuns as teachers. I was left-handed and kind of had red hair then, not as much now. And I was always in trouble, man. I was always in detention. It was weekly, and they would announce it over the PA system, so it's like,
oh my gosh,
dude, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And, I did some work with one of my guides, one of my mentors. And then I, kind of told him these stories and he goes, well, maybe you just wanted to be left alone. Maybe that's why you wanted to be in detention. Cause literally I'd be the only kid in there and I'd read my book. I loved, documentary type books or books about presidents and things like that. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I was really tall. I was about 6'2". I didn't grow after junior high. I'm 6'2", 6'3". And I feel like I got picked on a lot. I felt like I was an odd man out. I'm sure you can relate to this. I just never felt comfortable in my own skin. That's kind of a commonality too with a lot of people that, go through what we've gone through. And, I feel like it was almost like, a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense, or I don't know how you would say it, but it's like, okay, if you think I'm this bad kid, I'm just going to continue. I'm just going to do that then. Cause that, and it was kind of exciting. I mean, honestly, like getting in trouble, to me, it was just like fun.
You get attention when you get in trouble.
And that's probably part of it too. I started getting arrested in junior high and continued on into my 20s. And, I can remember one specific story a story that I tell often too, is that I was standing in line at school, St. Peter and Paul, and had to have memorized this prayer, which I did not know because I really wasn't a good student. And I was kind of sitting there in fear. And I thought to myself, if this is what God is, I don't want nothing to do with it. And so that was kind of a turning point where I just said, I'm good. Whatever that has to offer, like, I'm not interested. I want to see what the world has to offer. And I think that was the shift in getting sober, saying, hey, I'm a loving child of God. It's like the world will give you an identity. It'll chew you up and spit you out. You're chasing material things. You're chasing the wealth. You're chasing the better looking wife, whatever that is. None of those things will ever satisfy, in my opinion. That was my experience. And so, being able to wake up on a daily basis and just really have this peace in my heart, that's what I always wanted. Towards the end, when give you another really cool, quick story here. My sponsor, my guide, we did the steps twice. The first time I didn't get 100% honest. The first time I felt like I wasn't even really trying that hard. And he would say, Mike, how you chase drugs and alcohol is how you have to chase sobriety. And I didn't do that. And so I ended up going back out. But he asked me that first time, what do you want to get out of the steps? What do you want to get out of this process? And I said, I want a BMW and I want a big house, right? Like I was stuck in the 3D material world. And the shift was the second go round. The second go round was after a 4-day binge, starting in Albuquerque and ending in Tucson, starting with alcohol at a strip club, ending with smoking meth in a hotel room on the south side of Tucson. And it was enough for me to say, I'm done, the party's over. He asked me once again, what do you want to get out of this process? After about a month of me kind of just, your brain has to be at a certain capacity to be able to understand concepts that people are trying to help you with. So he's like, take like a month and just go to meetings and just really sit with yourself. Okay, well, what do you want to get out of it this time? And I said, I want peace in my heart.
Ah, you had a very, very patient sponsor to allow you to go through that. But I think it sounds to me you had to go through that.
I did. I did. And, my story was in the beginning, the first, I would say, gosh, 10 to 12, 15 years of my using and drinking career were more like the people that I help.
Mm-hmm.
We're more this, I'm functioning in society. I'm doing what I need to do, but I'm still partying and hanging on to this lifestyle that is giving me something. I guess at that point, it was my solution, right? Like that's what it does for our solution to our inability to feel like we belong. It's whatever that is individually. I mean, I can name off a plethora of things, but and then at some point it just stopped working. And that was that hotel room. That was that moment of clarity where I pull out a meth pipe and I look at it and I just said to myself, party's over. And like, and mentally just, this is not fun. Had an out of body experience walking this thing to the trash can outside the door, throwing it away, thinking almost to myself, what are you doing? 3 times that same day, almost going back there because I knew where it was at. I was like, as long as the maid hasn't cleaned the room yet, I can get it. Like those were the thoughts that were going through my head. And so once again, getting about a month of clarity under my belt, really, kind of calming my brain down and getting out of this fight or flight mentality. And just, again, you got to distance yourself from the substance for a while to really have the capacity to get honest with yourself and with other people and to understand concepts that have been beyond your mental capacity for a long time.
I love you talking about the substance being the solution. We talk a lot about that on this podcast, that alcohol or the substance is the problem, but it really is the solution to the problem. And you have to find a different solution. You ever think that you got sober for a reason? Because I think about the situation you're in. I would say most people probably don't find their way out of a place where they're smoking meth after a bender, yet something happened within you to walk away from that pipe.
No, absolutely. I truly feel like everything happened in divine order for a reason, to be able to, help other men deal with life's most difficult challenges. And usually those challenges are between our ears. There's this story, I'm sure you've heard it, where a guy's stuck in a ditch and, he's yelling for help and a guy walks by and he says, well, I'm a doctor. I can write you a prescription. And he drops it down into the hole, right? And he kind of walks off. And next guy comes by and he's like, help, can you help me get out of this? He's like, well, son, I'm a priest. What I can do is I can pray for you. Says the prayer, walks on. Third guy, he's like, help, help, help. The guy jumps in the hole with him. And he's like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, I've been here before and I know the way out.
Yeah. I think that ties into really what I want to talk about is your clients or people are often winning professionally while they're losing privately. They're in that hole, although maybe they can't see that they're in the hole. You think success can actually make the alcohol problem harder to see, not because they drink more, but because it removes the pressure that they might have created, honestly, sooner?
Well, I think that it justifies and rationalizes the behavior or the, maybe excessive. And when I say excessive, I mean, realistically, 1 or 2 beers, and I'm not inherently opposed to alcohol or to drugs. I often say that if I could still be doing those things successfully, I probably still would be, right? It just, again, for me, luckily it stopped working and I was able to make this major shift in my life. But, I think if you're able to go to work and get up every day and do all these things, I think it's just so much harder to, mentally come to a place where you're like, hey, this is actually hurting my relationships. It's hurting this, because just as much as alcohol and drugs, hurt you,
Mhm.
overworking, chasing money hurts you because you
Yes.
get so blinded by this one goal that you have. Hey, I want to retire at 40. Hey, I want to buy this $2.5 million house in the next 3 years, whatever. And you're so laser focused on that. It's like, you're hurting relationships around you. I saw an Andy Elliott ad for, he's having this like mastermind in Mexico at his home, and he was kind of talking about, I forget the whole post, but he's talking about how, a lot of these uber successful people, their children are going to end up in therapy and all these different things because they weren't there for them, because they had toxic relationships with their children because of their overworking, because of the societal cultural pressure to be this successful person. Whether you grew up with nothing or whether you just had parents who were uber successful and they had those standards for you, whatever that looks like, it's like, you know, the balance between being a good father or parent and, having a certain amount of success. Like I think you need to step back and define success for you individually, which I don't know if anybody's ever done, because just like religion is kind of forced on people, this idea of success is also forced on people.
Mhm.
And so, what is it that you're chasing? What is the validation? Why are you not enough? Like, these are all just
Right.
super deep questions that most people will never ask themselves. And that's fine. But when you get to a place in your life where you're imploding, because my personal experience was I had a lot of trauma as a young kid. It was modeled to me by my folks, by the people around me. We don't talk about things. We just push through. Right. And that stopped working at some point. So when you hold things in, eventually they come out sideways. You don't get to choose when they come out. And it's typically at one of the worst times possible.
It comes out. It's like pressing on like a balloon dog. Eventually it's going to pop if you press somewhere, but the pop usually happens where you least expect it.
Yep.
This is kind of fascinating because we had an episode about 2 or 3 back with Brooke Taylor, and she talked about it from a female perspective, but you guys are telling kind of the same story about the success kind of being the addiction. And her theory is above a certain professional level, those people are addicts in some way. Depending on how high up, like the C-suite people, you get that high up, there's something that you might be sacrificing already, which if alcohol isn't the disease, maybe running for success is, or pushing yourself hard. What do you think alcohol quietly takes from these people before it's visible?
Man, that's a great question. And to kind of, add to that point that this young lady was talking about. Funny enough, I had a young lady on my podcast who kind of said the
Mm-hmm.
same thing, just a little differently. She said, we're all prisoners to something.
Yeah.
Her son passed away of an overdose, and she was a suicide prevention therapist or
Mhm.
something to that effect. And she came on my show and said some of the most powerful things I've ever heard. And one of them was, I'm this person that can supposedly help people, and I couldn't even help my own son. Not that he committed suicide, he overdosed, but the techniques to help somebody to walk them off a cliff are probably the same to walk them back from drugs, I would imagine. And so, what does it take from somebody who is successful or has attained a certain amount of success? I think you end up disassociating to a certain extent.
Sounds like
I
it.
think that's probably the biggest thing. And alcohol provides this taking the edge off. For a lot of salespeople, I was in sales. I was one of the top salespeople year after year. Once I got sober, before that, I had all the potential in the world. And the word potential is typically, if someone's saying that around you, it's not a great thing, right? And so what
I
I
had
saw,
that growing up.
what I saw around me was the inability for people to shut off after work. They were still performing. They're, high energy, high performing individuals, and they need substances to continue that on after work, whether that's to calm themselves down or have enough energy to go out that night. And the substances vary on what they take. And to a certain extent, like, Okay, what's the difference between a broken homeless person like I was, or you see out there on the street, and somebody who's doing those same substances, but they have a job in a house and they can sleep 8 hours a night or 6 hours or 4 hours or whatever? It's like there's not a whole lot of difference other than, to me, what that person has from a material aspect, and they're able to just hold it together a little bit more. But those people that hold it together eventually implode big time. Whether that's in their marriage, whether that's in their doing something at work that causes them to get fired, whatever that is. And I think ego and pride is big. It kind of
Yep.
inflates your ego a little bit more. Like you said, hey, I'm not like that guy. Like, I'm not like that homeless guy. I'm not like that guy down there that he's drinking 3 more drinks than me every night. So, I'm making $500,000 a year. I'm not
Yep.
that guy. And so my fear was always that I would get to the end of my life and I wouldn't truly grasp what life was truly about.
Wow, that's a deep thought. I think about that sometimes. I have this nagging feeling that I'm on the wrong path or I haven't achieved enough. And I think about it on a professional aspect, but miss that whole, when all is said and done at the end of life, what is it that I truly accomplished that's important? And I think that's a really good reframe. I think a lot of these people, because I think about myself that I could push through the worst of anything. And I had that willpower for everything but booze. And I wonder if that's a thing that actually causes people who are really successful to delay finding recovery because they can push through anything and they have superhuman muscles for everything but their addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And the crazy thing to me is, like, think about the success that you could potentially have on the other side of drinking every day, on the other side of changing your relationship to alcohol or to substances or to pornography or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it from this perspective. I was a broken, homeless individual who had just got out of prison, who had surrendered rights to my daughter when she was a very young baby. And look at where I'm at now. So if I can make that major of a change, think about somebody who's already uber successful and then putting that down and really getting right with themselves, really going deep and doing some work and fundamentally changing as a human being, and where that could potentially take that person.
Yes. Just the example of overcoming whatever the addiction is an amazing example to somebody else that could be helpful. I talk about this every once in a while, that I was really struggling to get up in the morning to go work out until I got a pattern. And I told my friend Chris that I can't do this. This is really too hard. And he told me, you quit drinking. Isn't that a lot harder than getting up in the morning to go work out? If you could do that, you could do this. I mean, it's a small thing, but I looked at him like, you're absolutely right. Quitting drinking was a lot harder than just getting up at 6 a.m. So that was sort of my kick in the ass to say, yeah, I guess I can do this.
Well, and I think that's key, is because what you're saying is you'd already built this resiliency muscle surrounding getting sober. So we lose sight in the day to day in life. This is just how things are. Like, you lose sight of things. Just like if you don't work out for a while, you lose those muscles. Just like if you don't do some, major transformation for a while, let's say you're kind of on cruise control, you kind of lose that thought that, oh, you know what? I have overcome some really, really tough stuff. But it's just a matter of remembering that and stepping into that person that you were then and that you can be now to be able to achieve whatever goals that you have. And I truly feel that for me, the 2 biggest things that created the most amount of resiliency in my life were playing sports as a young person. I was a basketball player, never the starter, but I showed up for practice every day. I did all the
Mm-hmm.
drills. I ran on my own. My dad was a college tennis coach, so I was always in the gym, always working out. Before I even saw any kind of, improvement, really, because as a young person, your muscles are developing, et cetera. But then also I sold educational books door to door for 6 summers in college to pay my way through school before my life fell apart. And that was by far the best professional experience I've ever had in my life. And I would highly recommend that to anybody as a young person. You will learn so much about yourself. You will learn so much about your fellow man and woman. And, the skills that you sharpen, the skills that you develop through, knocking on someone's door, not knowing who's going to answer, trying to sell them a product, being successful at it. I mean, it will change your life.
I applied for a job to be a stockbroker, and I had to do that as my job interview is spend a day going door to door. And I actually did well, and I tapped out of that one. I'm like, I am not doing this, because by the end of the day, it was like that one last no for
Yeah.
whatever I was knocking on the door for was like, I've had it. But it was a pretty great emotional dopamine hit for the
Right.
people who would talk to me.
And
It's
that's
like,
why salespeople typically they are addicts and alcoholics, because we chase that dopamine. We love that.
yeah,
For a salesperson selling something, there's no greater hit than that. It's free. It lasts longer. You don't wake up hungover. But unfortunately, people that can't turn that off again end up turning for other substances. And I think once you have the tools um, to really understand what you're trying to achieve, it becomes a little easier. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah, it does. Once I heard you talk about doing like sales and stuff, I'm like, you remind me of my friend John in the program, who is a salesperson. And the way he talks about it is he gets so ramped up, and it's like that dopamine hit, and that I could see where it becomes very difficult to come down after that, that you need
yeah.
a lot of time, or you need a little help. You're helping other men. Tell me a little bit about your coaching. What does this look like?
Yeah, so I do one-on-one sessions. It's over a 12-week or a 24-week span, just kind of depending on the schedule. It's through Zoom, or I even do, VIP
Mm-hmm.
meetups for a week where I'll just go like super in depth with somebody and get them just a really good head start. And that came about because I was talking to a client who was considering going to a rehab in Milwaukee, and it was $50,000. But he
Nice.
said, well, they'll let me take my phone and work. And that was to him like the thing he's like, I'm really considering it. And I thought, if I could provide this service where I go to you, I get a hotel by your house or whatever, and then we just work for a whole week and just
Mm-hmm.
set this foundation, and you're still able to go home to your wife at night and still able to run your business to a certain extent or do whatever you need to do. Because I've been to the rehabs. I've done everything, right? Like I've tried everything to get sober, so I have experience in that. And it's like, what they tell you to do when you're done with rehab? Go to meetings. They tell you to go to AA.
Mm-hmm.
And really, they're just trying to set a foundation too.
Yep.
But I think if you can get really intentional and really focused for a week, one-on-one with somebody, I think they can have a lot more success. Because when you're just getting sober, let's say you're a day dry and you go into this rehab and you're like, what? There's so much going on around you. You're just trying to get your bearings straight. It can be a lot for some people, and that it was for me, and I never had a lot of success going into rehabs. It was just finally when I started sitting down, putting pen to paper, and just I had a spiritual experience, out of the whole thing. And I think one of the hardest things for men to do is getting really honest,
Mm-hmm.
not only with other people but with themselves, because again of ego and pride. So once I was able to just super get honest with my position in life, that's where the foundation started. Then I could build off of that.
I'm an all of the above type of guy. I'm a product of AA, but I also know that the program doesn't claim a monopoly. And if you need to have one or the other, or you're doing all of the above all together because that helps you, I think that's a great thing. And I love
100%.
that. as a result of the pandemic, we have Zoom now, and you can have these different ways to attack sobriety. You don't have to have just one option. You can find the thing that works best for you.
Yeah.
Tell me a
Yeah,
little
and
bit.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean,
Mhm.
you interview tons of people, so you have that experience, same as me. Like I've interviewed 35 tremendous business people who have all gotten sober, and they all did it a little differently.
Yeah.
And some say AA wasn't for them, and they did it this other way, and more power to those people. Some people read a book, and it was enough for them to make a change. There was a guy who I interviewed who he went to a ClickFunnels event with Russell Brunson in Idaho, met some lady who wrote a book called something about changing your relationship to alcohol. And that was enough for him. He said initially he wouldn't talk to her. He was kind of scared of her, right? Because he knew he was drinking and he wasn't sure if he
Yes.
wanted to stop. And so just really powerful stories of, like you said, nobody has a monopoly on it. The men that I work with, they don't resonate with AA.
Mhm.
Just like those same men are like, I'm not like that guy. He drinks more than me. They're like, I'm not like those guys in AA. And so it hinders them because they know that deep down inside, they know they need help. Those 6 a.m. conversations with themselves in the mirror, it's like, oh, I did it again. I did it again. But they're too prideful to go to meetings. Maybe their aunt never got sober and they have a resentment against AA, whatever that is. But I think it is important to find people that are like-minded or have a certain maybe position in life that you respect, and you're like, okay, now, because that was also my experience, right? Like I lived on the streets for a long time
Right.
in my addiction. I grew up on the streets here in Tucson, and so I would go in these meetings and I would see these old timers, as we call them, and I'd be like, I'm not like these people. Like this is lame. And then I saw a couple people. Neither one of them are sober, by the way, today, to my knowledge.
Mhm.
Uh, but I respected them because they had been on the streets. They had ran the streets and things like that. I was like, okay, if they can be here, I can be here. It was like that. It was like that just light switch moment where it was like, okay, I can do this. If they're here and, so I think in that same sense, if you walk in with a suit on, or if you walk in, with a certain look, people that are high achievers, I think they just have a certain look. They have a certain walk to them.
Mhm.
They're not there to BS around. They value their time. If they don't see other people like that around them, they're like, I'm out of here. So I think it's important to find people that you really resonate with.
Yes.
Maybe that have been where you've been, or that have done what you've done, or that you can just trust in. Because ultimately, if you decide to work with somebody, whether it's me as a coach or somebody else, you have to really fully put your trust in that person. Otherwise, there will not be this level of success in your sobriety journey, because you'll never get honest with them enough. Right? It's like you'll hold on to those 2 or 3 things that you're like, I'm not telling this guy this stuff, like for fear of what they'll think, for fear that they'll tell somebody, whatever that fear is. Because I know that was my experience. That first go round working with this guy, I had been sexually abused as a kid, and I wasn't going to tell nobody that stuff.
Mhm.
And I was afraid. I was fearful of maybe he'd think I was gay, maybe whatever that was.
Yeah.
And I became so desperate on that second go round after a 4-day binger, where I was like, I'm telling him everything. I don't care. Like I really want to live an abundant life. I want to have long-term sobriety. I'm tired of getting 6 months or getting a year or getting a month, and then this repetitive pattern. And so I think you mentioned something earlier. I just wanted to touch on life beyond sobriety.
Mhm.
It is truly about finding other things besides just 12-step, besides just smart recovery, besides just your faith. It's like expanding your consciousness. It's expanding your learning into things that really develop your spiritual core. And that's why my podcast is called Sobriety, Spirituality, and Sales.
Mhm.
I don't resonate with religion. Religion comes from man.
Yes, I agree.
Spirituality is a God-given ability to decide what your relationship is going to be. There's no rules. And I think that's super important. And I think a lot of people have strayed from religion or from church or whatever they grew up with or whatever they're, right? Because they saw things that they didn't like, and they let that's the egoic mind too, trying to keep us separate. And really, recovery is about connectedness. Recovery is about finding a community of people that you feel connected to. And today I feel so connected with my community, and it's absolutely terrific.
Tell me what you have taken away from the podcast. What is something that has been an aha that you've either learned or has been a pattern?
Well, everybody has just a incredible insight into life, and had this vital transformation of thoughts and ideas, this
Mm-hmm.
perception shift due to dark moments. And so how can you truly know the light if you've never sat in the dark, right?
Right.
And so some of these people were successful prior to getting sober. Some of these people were kind of like me, where they had glimpses of it or they had the potential. But either way, it's like you get catapulted, and I hate to use this AA term, but you get catapulted into the fourth dimension of existence.
Yep.
Which the material world is only what we actually physically see, but it's not what's real. It's not what is actually in this world. And I truly believe that with my whole heart. And I think when people can get beyond focusing on material things and treating people a certain way and living fundamentally different, but with core values that are really important to them, not just saying these are my core values, actually living those core values out. They live with this purpose and this vigor and have this fulfillment in their life, and they just have this spark and this joy to them. And I would say, to answer your question, all the guests, I haven't had one guest that I've asked that said no to me. They're all like, yeah, I would love to, because they know sharing their experience is also creating a healing atmosphere for them moving forward, but they're passing the message on in hopes that somebody else will hear. And my prayer every morning before the podcast is, Lord, let us help just one person.
Yes.
I just hope one person hears this message, that it allows them to have a change in their heart,
There are times I look at like podcast numbers and stuff, and I'm like, well, that one didn't do as well as I thought it was going to do, or this is not at a level I see other people, and I think we do really good work. And I get myself on that place of that superficial. That's the time I get an email out of the blue from somebody who says, hey, I've gotten them from like Britain. I live in England. I listen to your podcast every week. It helps me. I'm really glad you're here. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I got myself in the trap again. That I'm looking at all these numbers, and really that success is there was one person who was on the straight and narrow who might not be, or had that ability of the technology of there's something in your pocket you can take with you to get you past that next drink that you might want to take. And I think I love that you said about the values. I think those real values are, am I willing to sacrifice something because of my value? And if I'm willing to do that, and I'll walk that walk, then I guess I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. I had a client in Pennsylvania, and he was like, well, I just want to be a better person. And I'm like, okay, well, let's break that down.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually mean to you? And it was really hard for him. It was really hard for him to come up with this definition that worked for him. And so, and I've been there, and I think I'm still there to this day in certain ways. And I'll give you a prime example. This morning I do a breathwork session. I'm getting certified in elemental rhythm, which is a guy who learned from Wim Hof, and he's got his own kind of technique now. And it's just incredible, the transformation that I'm having from that. And I think, just the continual growth is really what that Beyond Sobriety is about. But it's like this morning, I'm trying to get in. It's a future self meditation after the breath work.
Right.
So I'm trying to okay, so what am I imagining a year from now? And it's like, it was so hard for me to do in that moment. Right. But I'm in this meditation, and I'm not trying not to overthink it. And it's like, same with this guy in that moment. It's like, he couldn't define what that was for him. And so I think part of what drinking and drugging and whatever escapism, let's call it, what that does is it prevents us from really finding what's truly important for us, who we truly are inside, and what's really important to us. Because it's easy to say, oh, this is what I believe in. This is because it makes you feel good. but yet we go against that, every day.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Mike, I am so glad that you spent some time with me today to tell the story from a different angle. And really, if you break this down, this is really no different than the low bottom drunk who's in the gutter. It's still all the same feelings. And I just feel like we got to hit that guy who has the extra barrier of success. So if you're interested in doing some coaching with Mike, you can find him at mikecurrycoaching.com. The link to the podcast is there. I'm jealous of his thumbnails. Thumbnails for the podcast are fantastic.
I found a guy in Bangladesh to actually help me with that for super cheap. So I'll have to hook you up with him. Also, I wanted to mention my Instagram page is Mike Curry Official for anybody who wants to follow me there. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to put all the links as well right below in the description so that you don't have to scan and write this stuff down. Technology's there. We're going to put that there. Mike, thank you for spending a little time with us this week.
Matt, it's been incredible. And I just, again, want to thank you and honor your time. And I know this has been a long time coming since the last time. So I appreciate your patience with me once again.
The way it was worth it.
Love what you do, man. Looking forward to seeing what comes next with your stuff here.
Awesome. See everybody
Have
next
a great
week.
day.
Yeah, you
Thank
too.
You.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.